All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the People's Forum. Thank you for choosing to spend your Friday night with us. I know we've all got busy schedules, but it means a lot that you're taking tonight to learn more about Palestine and how important it is for us to be struggling for Palestine, for Palestinian peoples, but also for our own interests in the U.S. for liberation. My name is Kate. If you haven't been here before, the People's Forum is a political education center dedicated to uplifting the working class struggles of people all over the world through political education, be that courses, be that art. You see art all over our walls. We do movie screenings every Thursday. We've had concerts, we've had fashion shows, because there are so many ways of engaging with politics, enriching our lives with the struggle for a better one. And so I'm also one of the editors at 1804 Books, which is the publisher that published tonight's books and a lot of the books you see at the front, because it's also a bookstore. And this book is actually a republication of a book that was published in 2008, 2009, because we saw the movement as it was burgeoning in this current moment. We've seen how it's been growing, but also with that growth comes a lot of new people who are interested in learning about Palestine and deepening their understanding of its history, not only in terms of understanding how the occupation came to be, but also more importantly, understanding why we are invested in the struggle for Palestine and how our government that oppresses us is also interested in the oppression of other people around the world. And so the origins of Palestine are clearly embedded in ones of Western colonialism and now US imperialism. So we're going to talk about that a bit more. I'll kind of leave it at that because I'm sure we'll have the next hour and a half, whatever, to talk about it more in depth. So I encourage you to come with your questions, your comments, your reactions. We hope you participate in the Q&A we'll be having at the end of this. And so I'll introduce our two speakers tonight. The first is Abdullah from the Palestinian Youth Movement. I'm sure you've seen PYM on the streets, but they are a transnational grassroots movement of Palestinian youth who are invested in mobilizing young Arab youth to take part in fighting for the liberation of Palestine everywhere. They've been taking part in the encampments, they've been taking part in popular education. We actually published a book with them called Trinity of Fundamentals, which I also encourage you to check out at the front. Thank you. And they've been in the streets, so if you've been in the streets, you've definitely seen all of PYM everywhere. And so I also want to introduce Richard Becker, the author of tonight's book. Richard is a longtime organizer fighting for the rights and sovereignty of Palestinian people in the face of Israeli aggression. He's an organizer with the Answer Coalition, and he has a lot of wisdom to impart to us. So again, I hope you are engaged tonight. I hope you ask a lot of questions. We're really excited to have you. And without further ado, I'll pass it off to you two. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Kate, for the introduction, and thank you, Richard, for being here to discuss the book, and thank you all for being here. Before we get started, just want to say that, of course, our thoughts are constantly with our people in Gaza, but also, of course, with the thousands and thousands of courageous students across the city and indeed now across the world who are taking a stand against their complicit administrations and proving that no amount of repression can slow this movement, that this movement for liberation is, in fact, inevitable. So we are thinking of them as well. Richard, I guess to get started with some of the early history for some grounding for the rest of this conversation, maybe you can tell us about how the formation of Zionism as a political movement became the foundation for the establishment of the State of Israel, and what role did the Balfour Declaration play in cementing the Zionist claim over Palestine?
Yes, thank you, and really great to see everyone here tonight. And just 2 days ago, Kate and I were up in New Paltz, where there was a demonstration of a couple hundred people, and there are demonstrations everywhere, all across the country, everywhere. When we talk about the Zionist movement, I just want to clarify at the beginning, we're not talking about a religious movement. Some religions have Zion as, a central part, but we're talking about, and we're also not talking about something that goes back 3,000 years. The myth, the many myths that have shrouded the reality of what's going on in Palestine that's one of the main things that we try to do with the book, was to aim at to demolish those myths. So modern Zionism really began, as they say, not 3,000 years ago, but a little over a century ago. It's first, there were little signs of it early on. Even in the 1880s, the Orthodox Jewish community in Palestine was opposed to the early Zionists who were coming, and even though they were in small numbers. But it really announced itself to the world in 1897 with the first World Zionist Congress, which took place in Basel, Switzerland. And that conference had a debate within it over where they should try to establish a quote-unquote what was called a home at the beginning, but the intention was always to create a state somewhere, and particularly from the beginning, the ideas about where that would be were, of course, not in Europe, where there was a great deal of real anti-Semitism, especially in the old Russian Empire, but all over Europe and America, but instead in some colonized part of the world. So it was a colonial movement from the beginning. And we know that because they said so themselves. Their leader, Theodore Herzl, wrote a letter in 1902 to Cecil Rhodes, who was the architect of British colonialism in Africa. And he says, why am I writing this letter to you? Because it's something colonial. And in other words, this was the idea. The Zionism was a contradictory movement. It was a colonializing movement on the one hand, and it was a reaction to very real anti-Semitism. On the other hand, although a very small minority of the politically active Jewish community supported that. But the other big contradiction that it had was that they had no army, they had no navy. How could you be a colonizer without an army and a navy? Not possible. So from the beginning, and this goes right up till today, and there's a lot of lines of continuity from that early period up till today, is that the Zionist movement had to find a sponsor. It had to find a sponsor that had an army and a navy. And they went to the Ottoman Empire. They went even to the Russian Empire with the home of so many pogroms and so much brutality against Jewish people. They went to the German Empire, and they really focused more as time went on. They would focus on the British Empire. And the British Empire, for 20 years, they pursued this course. They pursued the sponsorship of the British Empire. And finally, on November 2nd of 1917, the Balfour Declaration was issued. Balfour was the foreign secretary, the foreign minister of Britain. He sends a letter, and it says that, quote unquote, His Majesty's government supports the creation of a home for Jewish people, and I'm just paraphrasing, in Palestine. So that was on November 2nd of 1917. A year before that, and I think it's worth mentioning this, although it's more than Palestine, is that there had been an agreement, a secret agreement reached by the British, French, Russian, and some Italian empires in the middle of World War I, and they had an agreement among them, and it was called the Sykes-Picot Treaty, Sykes-Picot Agreement. And the Sykes-Picot Agreement was a plan for how to break up the Ottoman Empire, to split it up among all of these powers. Interestingly enough, 5 days after the Balfour Declaration, there was another event in the world on November 7th, 1917, and it was the Russian Revolution, the second part, the Bolshevik Revolution. And what is significant, what's relevant about this to what we're talking about is that the new revolutionary government in Russia, a few weeks later, published the Sykes-Picot Treaty. And this is like a key moment in the development of what we know of as the modern Middle East. Because the British and the French had engineered this Sykes-Picot Treaty. The British had promised that if the emerging Arab national movement would fight on their side in the First World War against the Ottoman Empire, that at the end of it, the British would support an independent Arab state. And so the people in the Middle East, to just take these dates again, 1915, they promised an independent state. 1916 is the secret treaty. 1917 is the Russian Revolution and the Balfour Declaration and the revelation to the people of the Arab world that instead of independence, they were being carved up among the two great in their violence empires in the world. And so that's how the modern Middle East really came into being. And those lines are lines that were drawn by the colonizers. The French took over what is present-day Lebanon and Syria. The British took over Iraq, Jordan, Palestine, and solidified their hold on Egypt. That's the terrible history, the terrible real history of how the modern Middle East came into being.
Thank you for that. I want to ask, I think, a bit about the so-called special relationship that came to develop between the U.S. and Israel. How did this relationship come to be, and how have we seen it evolve since?
Well, so the British were really the sponsors of the Zionist project from 1917, the Balfour Declaration, and they then taking over as a colony, they called it a mandate, Palestine. That lasted until 1947, when there was the illegal vote at the United Nations to partition Palestine into a Palestinian state and a Zionist state. And after that, the British pulled out, and then for a number of years, France was the main sponsor, the main supporter. The weapons came, most of the weapons were coming from France. And France also enabled Israel to develop the atomic bomb. They provided the technology and the materials when they were the main sponsoring big power. And in 1967 came the Six-Day War, in which Israel conquered, and it was a war of aggression, as the leaders of Israel would later admit, not for 10 years or 20 years, but later, and we documented it in the book, they say, oh, you know that story about how we were facing dire danger in 1967? Well, that wasn't really true. But it was then that they conquered the West Bank, Gaza, Golan, at the time, the whole Sinai Peninsula, East Jerusalem. And this was at a time it was kind of like the height of the Arab national movement. And this so impressed the United States that the United States decided that they would become the main sponsors. And it was under Nixon, who was elected in 1968, and who instituted the Nixon Doctrine in the years that followed. It was when that took place that the millions of dollars going to Israel every year from the United States turned into billions of dollars going every year. And it's been since then. And this is what I say is that the continuity is that it's never been possible for the state of Israel to exist without a big power sponsor.
I guess to stay on this thread of the relationship a little bit, you write in the book about this narrative which exists that the Israeli lobby in the United States dictates U.S. policy or leads U.S. policy in the Middle East, and you counter this narrative a little bit. I'm wondering if you can speak to that and your thoughts regarding how that's not useful.
Well, there's no question that the pro-Israel lobby has some influence. You know, the Defamation League, which is, as it should be called, and the AIPAC and the different lobbying organizations. And, you know, our wonderful representatives in Washington, you just wave a little money in their face and they'll follow you anywhere. It's a terrible system, like really a repulsive government. But saying that does not to say they don't have any influence. But the fundamental, I think, fact here is that they're investors also. The money that goes doesn't go because they have well, they do have some shared values. We can't deny that. But you know, the ironclad, you know, feelings of, you know, love and solidarity between Washington and Israel. That's all for public opinion. It's all to try to sway people and so forth. There's some we wrote in the book about the Israel Lobby by Mearsheimer and Walt. I don't know, some people may know of them, the School of Realpolitik, and they wrote a book about this. And the book has useful information in it about how outrageous it is, this relationship. But what they say in it is that, well, it would make sense if Israel helped the U.S. pursue its foreign policy aims, or if it helped make people in the U.S. more prosperous, which is, I found completely kind of off the wall. I mean, U.S. foreign policy has nothing to do with us. It's not for our benefit. It's not for our benefit at all. U.S. foreign policy is about profit, but above all, it's about global domination. And that's the fundamental strategy, the fundamental framework that U.S. foreign policy works within, not for us. Israel has done a tremendous amount for U.S. imperialism, a tremendous amount of damage. In 1983, for instance, when it became clear to the world that genocide was happening against the Mayan people in Guatemala, temporarily U.S. funds to Guatemala were cut off. Israel stepped in. Israel became the trainer of the Guatemalan army. The Galil an Israeli-made rifle became a standard weapon for the Guatemalan army as they continued the genocide. In 1979, Israel passed on the atomic bomb to South Africa. And why these are things that the U.S. wanted done, U.S. officials wanted done, but didn't want to appear to be responsible for. So why did they want South Africa to have the atomic bomb? Why did Washington want South Africa to? Because this couldn't have happened without Washington's approval. Because South Africa, when the apartheid regime existed, had responsibility for defending U.S. interests, U.S. imperialist interests in all of sub-Saharan Africa. They intervened, in Angola for years, until they were finally beaten by the combined forces of the Cubans and the Angolan military, with the support of the Soviet Union. Yeah, that was a big thing. And there's more. But they intervened in Chile after the coup in Chile on the side of the government. But where Israel has done the greatest damage is in the Middle East, and in the Arab world. It has really prevented development in so many different ways. It's been this, and it's interesting that in this book there's the reprint of a pamphlet from 1968 called "Israel, Base of Western Imperialism" by Abdul Wahab al-Masiri, and he goes into really showing how it is that the Zionist leaders themselves would say over and over again, we are not of the region, we are not of the Middle East. They talked about, we're from the Occident, we're not from the Orient, and that they didn't want to be part, but it's the very fact that it's a colonial implantation that makes it so useful to U.S. imperialism. And I say this because we see these reactionary Arab regimes also, like, Saudi Arabia, or take Bahrain, where the U.S. Fifth Fleet is based. The U.S. Fifth Fleet, the government of Bahrain signed one of the Abraham Accords with Israel, really against the interests of the Palestinians. But if the people in Bahrain, it's a dictatorship, it's one of these family monarchies, which unfortunately still exist. But if the people of Bahrain had their way, they would overthrow the government, and they would renounce that accord. There's no question about that. And so would people in Morocco, and so would people in many other parts of the Middle East, if they could. So because of that, in Washington, they are viewed, no matter how much they try to be buddies with the U.S., they're viewed as unstable. But Israel is different. Israel is a projection of European colonialism in a part of the world where it doesn't belong.
I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on, I mean, we covered some of the really sordid Cold War history of Israel supporting death squads and reactionary regimes. I'm wondering, perhaps over the last 20 years, the Bush years until now, if you could elaborate a little bit more on Israel's role in the region and how it projects or protects U.S. interests abroad.
I think there are many ways that they as I said, I think that every time a government, like, let me just take a step back. Israel is a warfare state. It's like some people have called it the Sparta of the Middle East. It's war after war after war. The 48 war, the 56 war, the 67 war, the 82 war, and the constant war against the Palestinians that go on. So we have that going. We have that taking place, and like Israel somehow appropriates the right to bomb anybody they want to. Anybody in the region that they want to. I mean, they bomb Syria on an almost daily basis. The U.S. is in certain ways still at war with Syria. I mean, what are the U.S. troops doing in Syria? They occupy the area of Syria that is the oil. I mean, Syria doesn't have a huge amount of oil, but it had enough oil for its domestic means. That's now, the U.S. is there, and they're working together with Israel. And, these, the attacks that take place on Syria and the machinations that Israel has with these other governments in the region are part of really defending U.S. interests, as well as the supposed interests and the real interest of those governments, but not the real interest of the people. They have held back. They have held back development in the region. Every time any government wants to think about, well, I take this step, what will the Israelis do, or what will Washington have the Israelis do? And so, I think it's a constant. It's a constant assault, really, not only on the Palestinians, but on the Arab world.
Yeah, thank you. I want to shift the conversation maybe a little bit to talking about this book as a tool. Why would you say it's important for people who are building a movement to understand the historical context of the Palestinian struggle? And how is this book designed to be a tool for organizers? How does studying its history arm us for the struggle here in the West?
Well, let me also say that I really recommend to people reading Trinity of Fundamentals, the book that the PYM, Palestinian Youth Movement, has worked so hard on. It's really a remarkable book, really, really remarkable book, and so important at a time like this, to seeing the struggle in a completely different respect. It really is a unique book. The book that we wrote, the Palestine and Israel and the U.S. Empire, is really an attempt to show out of the mouths of the Zionist leaders themselves what they intended from the beginning, and how they really view the Palestinian population. You have over and over again, if you look through this, that leaders, the Zionist leaders, making it clear before the existence of the Israeli state came into being, that their intention was to drive out the population. They called it transfer for many years. And there's many quotes from people who are saying this. We're in a big battle right now, right? There's a big battle that's going on about this. It's a battle that has never really taken place before in the U.S. The struggle between the supporters of Israel and the U.S. government and all these administrators and police forces and so forth, and our movement that's really developed so much, so fast. It's such an incredible and impressive movement. And in this battle, we want to be equipped to argue wherever we have to argue. We want to be able to explain to people who are coming around the reality and show them the reality of as opposed to as I said earlier today, as opposed to the myths that have surrounded this issue, the lies that have been told. And so we did the book with the intention of it being a resource for activists and for people who are new to the movement and want an introduction. The book is written in pretty plain language. It's not academic, as the chapters are short. It's written from the point of view of wanting to produce something that is of use to the movement and helps the movement grow.
Yeah, I would second that. The book is really, really digestible, and the information, I mean, it cuts right to exactly what you need to know. Who do you hope will read it? And what takeaways would you hope that they take from the book?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I think the people who are, coming into the movement. And also, we all know other people. And if the people are starting, the struggle itself is what opens people's minds up to new ideas. So right now, because of the struggle that's going on and the intensity of the struggle, a lot more people are thinking about this. I think that the Canary Mission and the ADL and all of them, their strategy is based on, I think they understand, this is not a really complicated story. The Palestinian people were driven out of their homeland by means of terror. Hundreds of thousands of people are still in refugee camps today. Then the Israelis are flying U.S. planes and dropping U.S.-made bombs on refugee camps. I mean, who's on the side of justice here? And so because it's not a really complicated story, the strategy of those on the other side has been to just get people don't go there. Don't go there because you'll be doxxed, or your career will be in danger, and your academic life, and so on and so forth. And so they've done this for a long time. So when things are quiet, they can get away with that more. But now, millions of people are wondering, want to know more about what's really going on. That's part of what the book is for. I think it's really we have to resist that. We have to resist that attempt to intimidate in order to shut up people, and make their strategy fail.
I guess to follow up on that, what does struggling against empire, struggling against Israel specifically here in the U.S., in the West, what does it mean for U.S. imperialism, and what does it mean for the Zionist project more broadly?
Well, I think the U.S. government is a little worried right now. They always seem so strong, and like they're invincible and all of that. But I think they're worried about this movement. I mean, I think that the movement is a radical movement, and at so many demonstrations, the people who say more radical things get louder cheers from the crowd. I think it's a movement in solidarity with the Palestinian people first and foremost, but I think it's also based on accumulation that's gone on over years, a number of movements, and it kind of reached a breaking point. And for a lot of people, they've had it with the system. They hate the system, and they hate the system for good reasons. And so I think that's very promising. I think they're worried. Like I said, I think they're worried about this, about what they see happening and what they see in the streets. And I think for us right now, we should take a lesson from the Palestinians. There's a kind of heroism that is commonly talked about, like someone runs into a burning building and saves a child, and we salute people for doing that. But I think the Palestinian cause has shown what I think the word is sumud, steadfastness in the struggle, despite life being made so miserable for people, so much in the West Bank. I mean, it's Gaza, of course, the horrors of what's taking place in Gaza. But if you're just, a person, a Palestinian living in the West Bank, and you have to go through this, go through every day you have to go through the checkpoints. And some 19-year-old soldier can pull you out, interrogate you, prevent you from going to work, prevent you from going to school, beat you, and even kill you. And then there'll be an investigation. And the investigation, of course, never goes anywhere. And this is life. I mean, so the Israelis want the Palestinians to leave Gaza. There's no question about that. That's their strategy, to get the population to leave. They want to get the population to leave the West Bank. They actually have ethnically cleansed a number of villages, these fascist settlers. And I'm not using the word fascist hyperbolically. Their leader, Smotrich, said, "I'm a fascist homophobe." I mean, he wasn't trying to hide anything. That the steadfastness, the heroism of steadfastness, it's explained also. It's also very much a part of the book, The Trinity of Fundamentals.
So I guess then a final and maybe more broad question about why the book. This was published initially in 2008, I believe, and just recently now republished. I think that implies that many things have been a constant over the last 15, 16 years, but also that there have been some crucial developments. I'm wondering if you can speak to that.
Well, the previous history didn't change after 2008, so we kept that in. But we also did an update of since then up until now, kind of in brief form, but they're like some of the main developments that have taken place since then. It has an updated chronology, which is highly useful. It also has an updated endnotes. And Joyce worked on the updating, who's here, worked on updating the chronology. And it's a very valuable chronology. It's written for activists too. And you can find more places to go for reading from looking at the endnotes. As a preface by the Palestinian Youth Movement and an introduction. So there's a number of new parts that have been added to it. And then it has not only the chapters that were written, but the appendices, a survivor of the Holocaust who speaks out in favor of the Palestinian Youth Movement. That was from back then. An interview on the project to end Palestine by a Palestinian activist who lives in California. An interview with Ahmed Sadat. It's from a long time ago. He's been in prison ever since then, but expressing the basic views of the Popular Front, PFLP. And as I said, the Israel base of Western imperialism, which is really just a brilliant document and really gets to the point of how when he wrote it, when Abdel Wahab al-Masiri wrote it, Rhodesia was still called Rhodesia, and South Africa was still an apartheid regime, and they were the best friends of the state of Israel. And I should say he ends that by recounting that al-Masiri, when he was a professor at Rutgers and teaching at Rutgers in 1968, the year after the 1967 war, Israel was supporting the U.S. war in Vietnam. They weren't sending troops, but they were doing other things to support it. And he says to this student who was from the Mapam party, which was called the Peace Party then, he said, "Why does Israel support the U.S. in Vietnam?" And the student immediately replies, "Israel must defend itself," which is worth thinking about. Because really what it's saying is, I think is a confirmation of what we're saying, is that Israel cannot really, it must be with the imperialists. They must be with one imperialist or another imperialist. That's essential to their existence. So defending themselves in that context means being in lockstep with imperialism.
Okay, so I said that was the final question, but I was lying. I've got one more for you. We're clearly right now in a moment of tremendous, tremendous upheaval. Perhaps even revolution. You've been in this game for a long time. Do you have any words, I think, for those who are out struggling on the streets now? Any words of encouragement, advice, anything that comes to mind?
Well, I would say this. It just seems to me that people are so strong right now. that you know, the courage of people who are participating in the demonstrations, who are getting arrested, some people who are getting arrested over and over again. I really salute everybody who's participating in this movement, and I think the movement is going to continue. It may take on different forms at different times. It'll take on different tactics. We all have to figure out what the best tactics are and the strategy and so on and so forth. But I think this movement is hope. It's the real hope for the future. There's not any other hope, in my opinion, but revolution.
Thank you. I think we can turn it over to you all for some questions, and maybe we could take two at a time. So we've got one up here and one right there.
Hi, thank you both so much. You mentioned that Israel has to depend on the imperialist, and right now, do you think U.S. is kind of losing control over its sugar baby, basically? Have they lost control over Israel?
Yes. Israel has recently shown a great interest in inciting a war between the United States and Iran. That's not new. I'm an architect. I was doing research in the World Trade Center months before 9/11. I wasn't there on 9/11, purely by coincidence, but I remember the faces of people that I knew that died that day. And it's clear to me as an architect that those buildings were not brought down by airplanes, that those buildings were blown up intentionally from the inside. There is the curious anecdote to that, that there were 3 offices that were investigating misprocurement of funds by the military in the United States. One office was located in the North Tower, the other office was located in the South Tower, and the third was located in the wing of the Pentagon that happened to have been hit by the plane, so-called. And all of these things smell to me, because I'm an architect, it's clear those buildings were brought down to controlled demolition, that this was something that was done intentionally, probably with the application of the Israelis, which had the end result of the United States going to war against Iraq, achieving the objectives of the Israelis. What can you say about all of that?
So I think, yeah, we can answer a couple at a time.
Can you repeat your question?
Do you think U.S. has lost control over Israel?
That
Lost its influence over Israel?
Basically,
do you want to respond to that? You want me to?
Oh, you can take that one.
I don't think that they've lost their influence. It's a very contradictory. There's a very contradictory situation. On the one hand, there's another contradiction, is that Israel's main objective is to get more land, is to expand. And it's for a long time. I mean, we quote in the book the year after they took 78% of Palestine in 1948, that the next year, Moshe Dayan, who was a rising officer, said, and you know, our borders are ridiculous. And they tried to start wars with Jordan with a massacre in Kibbutz in 1953. So that's what they want, is they want more land. And they think their state is way too small. And their intent, and they let it out sometimes that that's what they want. The U.S. has a different priority. Their priority is not how much land Israel gets. Their priority is managing and expanding a global empire, and preparing. One of the things that they're doing is they're really preparing, and I think it's clear for anyone who looks at it, that they're preparing for war with China. They see China as the big challenger to their strategy of global domination. China does not want a war, but it's being surrounded. So you have those differences that exist. And partly just because the main focus of U.S. foreign policy has shifted from West Asia to East Asia, the pivot to China, the pivot to Asia, it makes Israel in a certain way more important to the U.S. because West Asia, the Middle East, North Africa, that area is still very, very important. So if a large part of larger and larger part of U.S. forces are going toward prepare for war with China, Israel, and I think Israel knows this, so the U.S. has differences with them, but they're still an essential part, and I think that they just showed it. I mean, this $26 billion in additional assistance, and they're rushing, and it's really amazing that, in the eyes of the liberals, the way you become principled today, and they write about this, and it should be like Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, and you get on board with war. You get on board with war in the Ukraine, war against Gaza and against the Palestinians, war equipping Taiwan for war. It's really pretty amazing what's happened politically. About the question of the, I don't really believe what you believe about the World Trade Center. I think that was an operation that was carried out. I think that hitting the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, they didn't need a reason to go to war against Iraq. They were getting ready to go to war against Iraq. The war against Afghanistan was an outgrowth of the attacks on September 11th. But the preparation for war against Iraq had been going on for some time, really since shortly after the first Gulf War that took place.
Thank you. There are other questions?
I know you mentioned at the end of your talk, the only way forward is revolution. Right now, I would say I don't know if it's the only call, but the major call in the movement, especially in the student movement, is BDS, and specifically divestment. Now, I think there's two issues with this call. One, will they ever really divest? I think we've seen what our leaders in our ruling class is willing to do on that front. The other problem is what happens when they do divest. We saw in South Africa, South Africa now has the highest employment in the world. It's still basically an apartheid in many ways. And so I guess the question is, what is the way forward? And how do we move beyond BDS? Or do you have a perspective on that?
Hi. Prior to October 7th, my sympathies were with the Palestinian people, coming from an Irish background. There's a lot of similarities there. But I'm seeing a lot of things that I hadn't seen before. I guess my view wasn't that nuanced, but the severity, the way it's been sustained, the blatant American, co-belligerence, but something really important happened here, and I think it goes beyond, Palestine, and here back to this own country. I've seen a large Jewish presence at a lot of these demonstrations in solidarity with the Palestinians, and what I'm seeing here for the first time, they've been able to do something that I have never witnessed before, and crack this impenetrable, heretofore impenetrable wall of the anti-Semitism charge. And with all these Jewish that are out there, not only are they showing solidarity with the Palestinians, but I'm viewing them as American patriots here too. All these different states, all these different states that adopted these anti-divestiture laws and the cracking down on civil liberties here. There's more than one element here I'm looking at. I just wondered if you had any comment on that. Thank you.
I mean, I can maybe begin to answer the first question around divestment. I think probably there's a clear understanding amongst the students that none of these institutions have any interest in that. I think part of what we're seeing, and you spoke to an accumulation over years and years that have gotten us to this point, is an employment of a diversity of tactics. I don't think anyone would claim that this is like a first or a concrete step toward an overall revolution, but it's a tactic to employ, and it's one that is I think advancing certain gains, even if the ultimate gain of divestment maybe is out of reach. I think also the South Africa comparison is totally limited, like you say, but it also has its utility in this case. I think that those are really my main thoughts around that. I don't know if you wanted to add.
Well, about the point about who's participating in the demonstrations now and so forth, I think that we talked about it in the new part of this book about the 2018 nation-state law that was passed in Israel. I don't know if people know about it, but it was something that was there for years, and it was to declare that officially that Israel is a nation-state of the Jewish people. Only Jewish people have the right to self-determination in it. And there's more to it. Arabic was downgraded as a language, and so on and so forth. And it also, they were proclaiming, as they have a lot, that Israel is not only the state for the people who live in Israel, it's the state of all Jewish people in the world. And so I think that is being refuted by a lot of Jewish people who are saying, and then so if you have the government saying that, and you have them bombing apartment buildings to rubble, and saying, oh, we represent all Jewish people in the world, that's really dangerous to Jewish people. I mean, that's really, they kind of, for their own interest, they're doing this. But we see, and the polls all show it, but more importantly, the streets show it, that increasing numbers of young Jewish people, and not only young, but mostly young, are saying, we reject that. If you say you represent us, we want no part of that at all. And so you have to choose sides in this. There's no real middle ground. I mean, you can be with Israel, or you can be with the Palestinians. And that's what it really comes down to. I mean, some people are going to try to hedge that bet, but that's the reality of the situation. And I think that in their arrogance and in their disregard, really, for the interest of Jewish people, the government of Israel makes those kind of statements and claims.
I think we've got time for maybe one more question, if there's one out there.
Hi. I'm wondering if the two speakers could address the resistance that's going on throughout the region and the effect that it's had in Israel.
Sure. I think maybe one thing I'd like to address around that is obviously we understand that there's a constellation of forces in the region who take up resistance. I think it's important to note that these forces are not always in direct conversation with one another. They are individual actors, and then at times their interests align and that there's coordination. But the idea that there's Iran and then that there's these proxies who are just at the beck and call of Iran is a false narrative, I think, is primarily the thing I'd like to address. I'm not at all a strategist, I'm not at all an analyst, so I can't get into it more than that, but I think that's a primary thing that people who are in the movement need to understand, is that these are separate but rational actors who often overlap in terms of interest.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, thank you so much, Richard, and thank you all so much for being out here and for engaging with us.
Thank you.